Sometimes, when your relationship needs a good mending, before jumping to conclusions or starting to take steps, you give it one last benefit of a doubt, a chance to prove you wrong, and you cling to the hope that it does. Kay, a middle-aged woman, is exactly in this state of mind when, after trying out different looks and gazing in front of a mirror, she enters her husband's room. She wants to sleep by his side, but the man is extremely reluctant to agree. His wife's effort goes completely unnoticed by him, and he engages in a series of awkward movements and utters excuses that do not make any sense at all. Kay realizes there is no point in trying, so she turns back and goes into her own room. Her relationship didn't pass the test, and they continue to sleep in different rooms. The next day, we get to see their usual morning cycle. Kay is attentive and loving. She tries to make Arnold feel good by preparing breakfast for him, but the latter doesn't even spare a good look. He sits at the dining table and opens up a newspaper. All of this happens in such a sync that we are assured this ritual is definitely not a new one. Finally, Arnold gives Kay a heartless goodbye kiss and leaves. He will be back at 6 for a dinner with their children. Today is a big occasion. It's their 31st anniversary. While at work, Kay decides to talk about her relationship problems with Eileen, her co-worker, and a friend. Kay is desperate to hear from a friend that relationships can change and that no relationship is hopeless, but all she gets from her is that people don't change, and the same goes with relationships. That evening, during dinner, their children shoot in their parents' direction, asking a seemingly harmless and obvious question. They are interested in what they learned from each other. Kay is a little smitten by this question though. She says they got each other a new cable subscription. She awaits an awkward silence, but their daughter saves her the trouble and praises their gift. Encouraged by this, Kay goes even further and adds that there are a lot of channels. There is a hilarious pride in her words and in children's nods. That night, after their kids leave, Arnold watches his favorite golf show until falling asleep. Kay wakes him up then, and they both go to their separate rooms once more. This time, Kay fails to fall asleep. She would give anything just to go back in time and experience her relationship as it was in the past, loving and normal. And so, the next morning, she begins searching for a solution. The first place she visits is a bookshop, and she couldn't have chosen a better place to start. After some fruitless wandering along the shelves, she finds a book with a name that particularly speaks to her. The book is called You Can Have the Marriage You Want, and it is written by Dr. Bernard Feld, a renowned couples counselor. Kay reads the book in one day and visits his website at night. For the first time, someone plants a strong seed of hope in her heart by saying that even seemingly hopeless relationships can change. It is not too late, and it is not impossible to regain something that seems to have been lost forever. The next morning, Kay sits at the dining table with Arnold, and the latter is taken aback. In his usual morning routine, this has not happened in a long time. But he doesn't know yet that something even more unexpected will be presented to him in this instant. Kay hands him a pamphlet of an intensive one-week couples counseling by Bernard Feld in another city. Arnold is surprised. He doesn't think that this kind of thing is necessary, so Kay has to engage in an effortful and long attempt to convince him. She cannot make him budge, though. Arnold says she can do whatever she wants, but he isn't going anywhere. That day, at work, he shares this with his friend and a co-worker, Vince, who seems to have handled such a situation with his own wife a couple of times. He says that shiny jewelry and a temporary, flashy show of attention are an unquestionable cure in such instances, and Arnold, sharing the same mentality as Vince, does exactly that. He arrives home, holding a bouquet and earrings, and hands it to Kay. But his plan proves to be futile. He is handed back a boarding pass to use at the airport tomorrow, and so begins a small and futile disagreement about their relationship. Kay wants to know where the last time was when she was kissed, hugged, or touched for a different reason than taking a photo. Arnold doesn't answer that rhetorical question, of course, and he fails to come up with a different solution to this problem that is suddenly turning his life upside down. So Kay leaves his supper on the table and tells him she will wait for him on the plane tomorrow. Everything is already paid for and taken care of by her. The next morning, Arnold watches from the window as Kay drives away in a taxi. He sits at the dinner table alone with no breakfast in front of him, and he decides to raise a white flag in this particular battle. He enters the plane in the next scene and sits beside Kay. The initial battle is lost, but his face clearly states that the war has just started. Despite this, however, Kay is extremely happy. She maintains a positive attitude towards everything, and she is so glad that her husband is here with her. This is how they arrive at a small town called Hope Springs. Their motel room has one bed. Kay hopes Arnold will at least temporarily leave his habit of sleeping alone behind, but the latter decides to rest on a pull-out instead. The next morning, this peculiar couple strolls around the sunny streets in search of a good breakfast. Kay's illuminated face is an almost comical contrast with Arnold's grumpy and dissatisfied expressions. In this small, romantic town, he feels like a victim of some well-thought-out conspiracy. Even the waitress in a cafe understands that they are here for the couple's counseling. She is clearly proficient in noticing Dr. Bernard's visitors, and she wishes them a fruitful week. After breakfast, Kay and Arnold finally find the counseling center, and Arnold anxiously states that he won't endure any classical psychoanalytical discourses. Throughout the initial introductory session, Bernard, a kind-looking professional, doesn't need much time to understand the full situation. From the expressions of his clients and from the way they speak about their relationship, he concludes after 2 minutes that Kay and Arnold have severe intimacy issues. Arnold doesn't like how this is going, of course, so he uses every chance he gets to insult either Bernard or this entire process, but the positive tone of the meeting still maintains thanks to the psychologist and Kay's helpful attitudes. In the end, Bernard says that their therapy sessions will focus on rebuilding their lost intimacy and developing the tools necessary to sustain that intimacy over time. Before that will be possible, however, first some scars, past pains, and grudges are to be dealt with. When the couple leaves the building, Arnold is infuriated. Now that Bernard isn't in front of him to answer his objections smartly, he goes on and on about his parasitic profession. This attitude of his doesn't vanish throughout the entire day. Now that he has done the thing he so despised, he believes Kay should do the same in the future. Arnold thinks that in the second battle of their war, he has the upper hand. The next morning, however, he still sits in front of Dr. Bernard, even pleasantly engaged in a conversation about the history of his relationship with Kay. The story of how they met is quite lovely. However, after a few months since their marriage, Arnold got a serious back injury and was asked to sleep alone in the guest room. Besides, he had bad sleep apnea, so he got in a separate bed and was never even asked to move back in with Kay. This story also shows that Kay was never good at communicating her needs, to the extent that throughout the 31 years of her marriage, she never even once stood up and asked Arnold to sleep in one bed. Bernard immediately sees this, of course, so he comes up with the first exercise for them. They should spend one night in each other's arms, just to remember what it feels like to touch each other. Kay's eyes light up. She looks at Bernard with an expression illuminated with gratitude. But soon her face changes dramatically. Arnold feels endangered and cornered. He dashes forward to attack, calling this exercise a forced intimacy, and stating that he won't be regarded as a trained monkey. Seeing the infantile hostility of her husband, Kay is extremely disappointed. She cannot help herself but to storm out of the room. Arnold runs after her into the overcast day, but she doesn't stop to listen. All of this is too much, so she runs and runs until she sees a pub in front of her. Arnold passes some time in a museum until getting back to the motel, but Kay has much more fun. In the pub, thanks to the wonderful community gathered there, she feels some relief at last. Arnold tries to hide the fact that he is restlessly waiting for her when she gets back. He's uttering some passive-aggressive sentences, but this time his words lack bitterness. He's clearly anxious about something, and when Kay gets in the bathroom to prepare for bed, we get to know what it is. Arnold approaches the door and tells Kay that if she doesn't want to do the exercise, he doesn't care at all. Kay opens the door immediately. Of course, she wants to do it. And so, the two get in bed together after 31 years of spending every night apart. The change is difficult, and it is perhaps twice as hard to describe the way they embrace one another that night. When Kay wakes up the next morning, she feels Arnold's arm over her shoulder and, completely delighted, begins her day with a happy smile. That day, Dr. Bernard's room is filled with sunlight, and the couple's cafes are illuminated and they're ready to talk about their night's experience. When Bernard says that, due to their initial success, now they are ready to easily tackle the next one, Bernard is excited and confident, and both he and Kay prepare themselves to receive another task. But after Bernard says the next words, a heavy silence falls and crashes the entire room. They have to talk about sex now. Everything about it, the history of their sexual life, what they liked and disliked, what they wanted, what they fantasized about, everything should be expressed, until, in the end, Bernard comes up with their second sexual exercise. Arnold is so embarrassed that he feels inclined to terminate the process right away, but he's surprised to see that even though reluctantly, Kay is still willing to go along with it. And so begins the cascade of questions, and Arnold is even more surprised when, in the end, Kay admits that she has never fantasized about doing something different in bed. Her only fantasy is not of a sexual character at all. She dreams about a small vow renewal ceremony at the beach. From her answers, we get the basic picture of their sexual life, and it is incredibly boring. After seeing that Kay didn't perish from answering sexual questions, Arnold decides to participate as well. Here, as Bernard skillfully creates a safe space around Arnold, he gets to learn a lot about his perspective. Arnold seems to have had a lot of fantasies. Bit by bit, while averting his eyes from his wife, Arnold admits all of them, thinking that he should be ashamed of having such thoughts. Now Kay is the one being taken aback, and Bernard is extremely satisfied with the way the session turned out. He praises their honesty and gives them the second exercise. That night, sitting on the side of the bed, we prepared to complete it, and we saw what it was. It is a simple, touching exercise. Kay goes first, and the struggle she goes through shows just how unaware they are of each other's needs and preferences. It's been so long since their last intimate contact that the two seem like rigid teenagers in the face of a dangerous act. Kay tries a few different moves, but none of them seem to work. Then, finally, she finds the spot and sees Arnold slowly gliding his way towards pleasure. Until now, he's been talking about how unscientific Dr. Bernard's ways must be, but suddenly, his breath starts getting in the way of words. This doesn't last long, however. Arnold sits up unexpectedly and, without disclosing the reason, terminates the exercise. He looks anxious and avoidant. That night, the two sleeps in separate beds again. The next morning, Dr. Bernard asks them how the exercise went. The couple is a little reluctant to begin, but the questions don't stop coming. So shortly after, Bernard begins grasping the heads and tails of the situation. He turns to Arnold now, and motivated to understand the reason and meaning of his actions, asks him a few questions. Arnold is insecure, however. He tries to avoid answering them, until Bernard goes a little too deep. He assumes that Arnold got afraid last night and tries to find out what was so scary about the situation to him. But instead of admitting anything or answering his question, Arnold decides to leave the office. Everything about his appearance speaks to the fact that he's hiding under some thick shell, and he is eager to protect its integrity at all costs. That evening, he walks on the empty beach all alone and looks at the horizon, perhaps trying to speak with himself. Then at night, upon getting back to the motel, he sees Kay packing the bags. She says that Dr. Bernard offered to give them a 50% refund. She is ready to get back home now. Here, seeing all of his skepticism justified, Arnold begins asking Kay about the motivation behind this senseless detour. He is eager to understand just what she expected would happen. Relationships cannot change in a week. There is no magic that, upon one flick, reignites fire in a couple's hearts. Kay's voice while answering is heartbreakingly sorrowful. She says that throughout her entire life, she had something to look forward to. To find a lover, to get married, to have kids, to be left alone with her spouse again. But now for the first time she feels that there is no way to go. There is no way for her life to improve. Perhaps her not wanting to come to terms with this was the real reason why she felt a particular gravity towards Dr. Bernard and his counseling sessions. We don't see Arnold answering Kay's honest monologue, but in the next scene, we see him sitting in front of Dr. Bernard again. And so begins yet another session, and Bernard wants to talk about the reason why Arnold decided to come back. All he receives is yet another anger explosion, so he changes gears a little bit and becomes curious about what is standing behind this anger. Arnold must be afraid of something in this office. Finally, the answer slips out of Arnold's mouth. He believes that therapists tend to make you talk about things you would never talk about on your own, and that they make you say something you would rather not say because it might be dangerous for your relationship. But now that all of this is said, Kay wants to know what it is. She promises will understand. She will endure any missile coming towards her. Still, Arnold is reluctant to let it out, but finally, he opens up. He turns to Dr. Bernard, but the latter redirects him to Kay. And so begins one of the most important steps in regaining intimacy, admitting having grudges. Both Arnold and Kay blame one another for losing connection, and both come up with some reasonable, strong arguments. None of them admit that they did something wrong. Instead, both try to present themselves as victims. All the while, Dr. Bernard is attentively evaluating the situation, sometimes even with a smile on his face. He has seen so many relationships, and he knows that this is the unquestionable beginning of the healing process. Arnold becomes really emotional while letting go of his resentment. It seems that initially, Kay was the one distancing herself from her husband. While having intercourse, she didn't feel wanted and had no idea how to get her point across, so instead, she rejected intimacy completely, and in the end, both stopped trying. The spiral of grudges can go forever and ever, and in the end, it almost feels like the connection is lost forever. Just like Arnold said yesterday, there is no magic wand to return relationships to their original form. What is lost is lost. Dr. Bernard, however, doesn't seem to share this nihilistic attitude at all. He knows exactly what to do. He asks the couple to remember their best sex and their best time together. Even though it wasn't so good, for a moment, both Kay and Arnold sink into their thoughts, until Arnold jumps up with an answer. The time he remembers brings a smile to their faces, and for the next few minutes, until the very end of the session, the couple forgets all about their grudges. Instead, their faces illuminate with reminiscence. This is what Arnold remembers. They were in a kitchen, and Kay was pregnant. She was making a soup and had to pay attention to it, but she forgot all about it when Arnold and she came down on the kitchen floor in passion. Arnold even put some dish towels behind Kay's head. In that moment, they felt as if they were the only people on this earth and nothing else mattered. Dr. Bernard comes up with another example now. He realizes that it might be way out of their comfort zone, but he prefers to give them a real challenge, something rapid and effective. This session turned out to be extremely productive. They are sitting in a movie theater in the next scene, and Arnold has no idea what is about to happen to him. The exercise demands that only one of them know its content. Some French comedy starts, and anxious Arnold thinks he will be given a sudden task at any instant. But soon he realizes that he won't have to do anything at all. It seems that Dr. Bernard assigned Kay to fulfill one of Arnold's sexual fantasies in a dangerous, crowded place. Arnold lets it all happen, so in the end, it is not the dangerousness of the situation that forces this process into termination. Rather, it is the physical discomfort Arnold feels. He jumps out of pain a couple of times until Kay decides that she is not meant for such things. She gets up and runs outside, desperate that she'll never manage to be sexy again. Arnold runs after her and tries to convince her otherwise, but he's not so good at that job. The next day, Dr. Bernard holds 2 separate sessions. First in line is Kay, who expresses just how much she struggles with the things that should come naturally. Touching Arnold is a tormenting labor for her, especially when she has no idea how to satisfy him. What is even more troubling is that, living with her significant other, she feels alone. Kay admits something then. Sometimes she even wonders if she would feel less lonely without Arnold. Bernard gives her the name of a book and reckons it will help out a lot. Kay walks around a bookshop anxiously in the next scene. The consultant offers help a couple of times, but she is too embarrassed to tell him the title she is searching for. Finally, however, she forgets all about pointless awkwardness and asks for the book called Sex Tips for Straight Women from a Gay Man. As the consultant says, they always have that in stock. Moving on to Arnold, during their session, Bernard makes great points. His job primarily consists of either helping his clients get back together or helping them separate. He sees that Kay is extremely unhappy, while Arnold doesn't seem to notice it at all. Kay is clearly putting everything on the line, and Arnold should do the same. He should participate in the process of rebuilding his marriage. Naturally, Arnold's first reaction is anger and aggression. But Bernard, with his clever arguments, manages to change his perspective. Inspired by the sessions, throughout the rest of the day, both Arnold and Kay follow Bernard's advice. While the latter strolls around supermarkets to find something to practice on, Arnold visits a delightful restaurant and, despite his great persistence, breaks his back to get a reservation there. In the evening, both dress up nicely and go out for a date. Kay is amazed by Arnold's thoughtfulness, and even the sight of the restaurant is enough to make her that excited. The evening turns out to be extremely lovely. The couple immerses themselves in pleasant reminiscences. It is evident for the entire duration that the connection between them is slowly but surely taking shape. They remember just how much they wanted each other back then, when they weren't even a couple, the excitement and thrill of the first great love. Time passes, and the two end up being the loudest couple in the restaurant, laughing loudly in an unrestrained, youthful manner. Arnold reveals the last surprise then. They don't have to return to that motel tonight. He got a room upstairs. Kay is extremely impressed with her husband. Entering the room, she walks around in amazement. The consequence demands intimacy now. The most natural way to proceed is to get close to each other, and knowing this, the couple becomes anxious. They sit on the floor to eat some strawberries until Arnold jumps up to open up a bottle of champagne. The popping sound seems to evaporate all anxiety out of the room, and as Arnold gets closer, instead of taking the glass from him, Kay takes the first step towards intimacy. Arnold hates to do this, but he asks her to pause for a second. Putting on some music and dimming the lights, Arnold comes back to her, and the two lay on the warm floor in front of the fireplace, passionately embracing one another. Arnold gets on top then, and Kay sees how he closes his eyes wide shut and looks away as always. She won't have it this time. Holding him and turning his head, Kay asks him to open his eyes and remain present. But suddenly, after doing this, Arnold's passion dissipates completely. And as he rolls over, Kay finally realizes something extremely hurtful. Her husband is no longer attracted to her. Arnold quietly denies it, but everything from the numbness of his face to the guilty tone of his voice speaks to the fact that he is no less hurt by this realization. The next session is as silent as the deepest point of the ocean and as grieving as the funeral of a loved one. Kay and Arnold are in no mood to speak. They think they've failed and that there is no hope. Dr. Bernard looks at the matter from a different perspective, however. He says that this is a natural part of the development. They started trying to become better and stumbled a little bit. There is nothing to be saddened about since they first came in here. The two have clearly changed. With this, their sessions are over, and Dr. Bernard recommends another counselor that they can address upon arriving back home. He is right. Something very simple shows that Arnold has changed. On their way back, instead of considering himself a victor and boasting about it, he is as silent and grieving as his voice. And so, with this, their ordinary routine comes back with full force. Arnold isn't happy to engage himself in his daily activities anymore, but bit by bit, he manages to come to terms with this dull way of life. Kay is the opposite, though. Sleepless nights go by, and she grows more and more desperate. One day, during work, she asks Eileen, who's leaving town, to let her stay at her home for a couple of nights. Eileen understands that Kay must truly have a reason if she's willing to leave Kay, so she agrees and asks her no further questions. That evening, Arnold must be having some dark premonition, since he starts talking about how it is alright to be back to their original ways. They feel bad because they had false expectations and felt different for some period of time, but that was only a makeover. Now that the makeover is gone, they are back to their old routine. Arnold is waiting for Kay to agree to his seemingly rational way of looking at things, but the latter expresses that she doesn't know if she can ever go back. That night, while crying her heart out, she packed her bags. Arnold comes to her door, brushes his finger across it, but chooses not to open it. Instead, he goes back to his room and, just like his wife, fails to sleep. Kay cannot believe that this is her last night sleeping in here, that her marriage is over, and that Arnold will never change. It is well over midnight, however, when the latter enters Kay's room. He walks in quietly and says nothing other than her name. Afterward, he sits by her side, holding her hand, and revives the relationship. He has finally decided to change. After realizing that Kay was willing to put an end to everything, he understood that maintaining the most important part of his life needs work and effort. And a simple act of walking in a room proves to be the grand gesture that is enough for Kay to know that her husband has come back. The next morning, after spending the night with Kay, Arnold tramps inside the kitchen. It seems like he overslept and is eager to leave the house as soon as possible. He has no time to eat breakfast, so he turns back to the main door but suddenly stops in the corridor. Quickly then, he comes back, walks up to his surprised wife, and kisses her as passionately as he's ever kissed her. Kay is so taken aback that it is only shortly after Arnold leaves that she sees his suitcase, still lying on the kitchen table. With an illuminated face, she runs after him. Carol, Kay, and Arnold's neighbors walk past their front yard when all this is played out. She initiates a little conversation with them, and at the end of it, she clearly regrets that she is still single. Her married neighbors seem to be so happy, it must definitely be easier to live with someone else.